Okay. Can everybody see my screen at the moment? It's not full yet, but
Not full screen yet, but yeah.
let me just swap the display settings around. Okay, full screen. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. So the session today, as I'm sure you're all aware, is on complaints in housing, and we're going to have the latest insight from the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales. So as always, thank you very much to our fantastic sponsors. We've got Wales and West Housing, Llywodraeth Cymru, Welsh Government, Pobl as well. So a big shout out to them.
Yep.
So the hosts of this session, some of you might be looking at me and thinking, who is that? So I'm Olivia Brown. I've recently joined the TPAS Cymru team, so I believe this is my fourth week now. So yeah, lovely to meet you all as well. I'm sure we'll get to know each other quite well over this course of time. And I'm the project and events coordinator. You can see my email by there. David Wilton, I'm sure, needs little to no introduction. Hi, David.
No, 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 but
Very familiar face on the face of TPAS Cymru as well. So yeah, we've got our email contacts there in case you did want to follow anything up from this session as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping, always good to have some ground rules. Please use the chat function for comments and thoughts. We'll keep an eye on it as we go through and pick anything up as well. Obviously, later on we will have a sort of Q&A session as well. But if there's anything you don't really feel comfortable asking out loud, you can always put it in the chat too. Yeah, please use the chat. So any slides used will be shared where the speaker has given permission. So Sarah and Michelle, I'm not sure, I can send the slides out to everyone at the end if you were happy with that, the ones you were using, and also our ones as well. As stated at the beginning, this session's recorded and it will probably go on our YouTube and website and things as well. We've also got a little Zoom sort of survey feedback thing at the end. It's really, really short, but we'd be really grateful if you could just give us some feedback on the session. Really helps to sort of feed into any other future sessions we'll be doing as well. And it doesn't take too long either. I'd be very relieved to know. Also, if you've got any queries about TPAS Cymru membership, please follow up with myself or David for any advice or support. Okay, some exciting upcoming events for you. So one of them is actually tomorrow. So we've got our Tenants Voice Cymru Forum, really making sure we can hear tenants' opinions on this matter. So we've got one on influencing how social housing landlords respond to damp, mould and other hazards in homes. So this is actually related to a consultation that the Welsh Government are doing because they are consulting on a proposal to introduce a new rule in relation to how social landlords respond to damp, mould and other hazards in homes, and looking at introducing a sort of time frame. So yeah, that's on tomorrow. If you are interested, there are still spaces available, so please book on. I'm going to put all the links in the chat after as well, so you can have that. I'll stick them in now once David starts speaking as well. We've
can I say
also
so that one is a really good one for the person who's leading that from Welsh Government tomorrow is the person leading the consultation. So you get to talk as tenants directly to the person writing that or leading that consultation. So you can influence the person. So I know I'm stressing the point there, but I think it's really important. Your
yeah.
voice can influence there. Yeah.
Yeah, we'd love to have as many people as possible on that one. It's a really, really exciting opportunity. We've then got a series all about tenants refusing access, which is extremely topical at the moment. We've got a session. The first one is about listening to officers. It's all about officers saying what's the problem from their end and why are refusals happening. But as I've said, it is a series, so we've got different ones as well, you know, about why tenants refusing access and things. And there's a three-part series of that. The first one is on Tuesday, the 19th of May. So yeah, definitely book onto that one as well if it's of interest. Really topical and exciting thing at the moment. I'm gonna hand you over to David now because David is the one to speak to about this, but we've got Net Zero Week as well.
In about a month's time, as some of you have been before, it's a week-long event, about 9 events, all online. We're retrofitting. We've got case studies from England and Scotland. Well, the minister, we've got people talking about how we're going to fund it, how's that going to impact rent and things like this. Some really interesting sessions. It's all online. There's a what's called a group pass ticket. It's really cheap for a landlord to buy, and then anyone in that organisation can go with the group pass. So again, we'll put some links on the side, but really recommend it. It's such a big subject, and tenant voice is key to that. Yeah.
Thank you. And then lastly, before I sort of hand you over, we've also want to wish you a really warm welcome. Croeso cynnes iawn i'n siaradwyr, our speakers. We've got Michelle Morris, the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales, and we've also got Sarah Jones, who's the interim head of the Complaint Standards Authority. So yeah, we've got the pictures there as well, and I will be handing you over to them shortly. Let me just stop sharing my screen a second. And David, I don't know if you wanted to add anything in there.
No, just before that, I was going to launch a quick poll if it works.
Yeah, I can
I think
see
you can
that.
see there. I literally wrote this seconds ago before the session while we were typing. But in terms of the Public Service Ombudsman of Wales, they cover so much of public life. I don't know whether you can see there or vote. Does it
Um,
work? Is it coming up on the screen? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
How many organisations in Wales is covered under the Public Service Ombudsman? I think this is only a rough figure, but it shows, I think, the size and the scale and the one great work that they do in terms of keeping public services and accountability. So just give me a second to vote. See, it's still, people are still voting, so give you a second. Slowing down now, so I'm going to end the poll and hopefully show it as well. Share results. Does it come up? Can you see, Olivia, the results? So I think the majority there have gone for 330. So I don't know if Michelle, if you want to give us the correct answer for this, as part of your yes, and whether I'm stealing any of your slides, but yeah, is 330 the correct answer?
No, it's a bit bigger than that. So we've actually got in excess of 400 public bodies in jurisdiction. I don't think he's stealing my thunder. I don't think I've got that on any slides today, but I probably would have mentioned it because it gives as you say, a real good insight into the breadth of the services we cover in Wales.
So over 400, and I think that, I'd say, is incredible, the amount of organisations and the impact that you can have, or you as you do have across Wales in keeping organisations, councillors to account. Warm welcome, and thank you for coming today to TPAS Comedy.
Yes, thank you very much.
Lots of stuff, Olivia.
I'm gonna get the slides up ready, and then I will start giving the controls over. Let me just, oh, hang on. Okay, can everybody see this screen, full screen? Oh,
yep.
Yeah, hang on, sorry. It's being a bit weird about controls. Sorry, David, I'm trying to see where my controls have gone. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to give the remote control firstly to Michelle. And
come off full screen though.
Yeah, let me just go back. Sorry, here we go. Is that full screen? Can everybody see my full screen here?
Yep.
Fabulous. And Michelle Morris, you should hopefully have control over the screen now so we can test that out. Let me know if not.
All right, thanks, Livy. We'll find out in a minute when I try and move on the slide.
No problem.
Thanks very much for the invitation to come along today and take part. I think this is perhaps the third Meet the Ombudsman seminar I've done since I've been in post. Really value these opportunities to come and talk to you about what we do and to hear your perspective as well. So, you know, we have got a presentation to go through, but really keen to hear your questions and comments and thoughts at the end of the session as well. I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah Jones, today, and we'll be sharing the presentations we go through. Just to say, Sarah is actually our Improvement and Complaint Standards Manager. She's been successfully appointed into that post on a permanent basis now, so will be a familiar face that you'll be seeing as you know, as your organisations are involved in our work. So I've hit the button. Let's see how things move forward. I suspect that there's a bit of a delay. Which is why the slide's been slow to move forward. But perhaps if I keep talking, it'll catch up. So I think the first slide is really about our role. So just to start with that big picture stuff, what exactly is our role as an organisation? There you go. It's pinged up. So the first thing we do, and I suspect you all know about this, is that we investigate complaints about public services. What's important about that role and my role as Ombudsman is that we're independent. We're independent of government in Wales or anywhere for that matter. We are independent of all public bodies. And that means that we can look at complaints that come to us independently, impartially, and fairly. And that's really, really important. Usually by the time people get to us, they are a bit frustrated and have been struggling for a while to get their complaints dealt with. So our core and the biggest bit of our business is investigating complaints about public services. And as you just heard, over 400 bodies in jurisdiction for basically any service which is devolved to the Welsh Parliament. So anything that's the responsibility of the Welsh Parliament as opposed to Parliament in London is under our jurisdiction. So the big things like health, housing, local government are all there and account for about 80 to 85% of our work. What isn't there is things like welfare, police, courts, justice, because those are all things that are not devolved to the Parliament in Wales, but still a big jurisdiction. The second area, which you may well have heard about, it's not something we're going to talk particularly about today, it's a whole seminar in its own right, is that we consider complaints that individuals can bring to us about councillors in Wales and allegations that they may have breached the code of conduct. Now, this is a big area of our business again, because it's not only principal councils and fire authorities, it's all town and community councils. So there's something like 700 different councils in Wales, which is amazing when you think about the fact we're only 3.2 million people who live in Wales. But there are thousands of councillors that come under this work. And so it's a very busy part of the office. And then finally, and this is a really important part of what we do that I think perhaps is the one people are less familiar with, is we've got a key role in driving systemic improvement in public services. What I mean by that is that when we see complaints, when we investigate them, we're able to make recommendations back to public bodies. And largely that is about if we've seen a service failure or maladministration, we've upheld that complaint. We just don't want to uphold it for the complainant that's come to us, although that's really important. What we want to do is make sure that whatever's gone wrong is put right and that doesn't happen again to another family or another individual. And when people bring complaints to us, usually they want to know what's gone wrong. They want to understand what's happened. They want, quite rightly, an apology and someone to say sorry that happened. But also they want to make sure that won't happen to someone else in the future. So it's a really important part of our work, and Sarah will talk a bit more about that when she takes over the presentation. So moving on to the next slide that's talking about, I realise that I'm talking off the screen and therefore I can't see the slide. Just pop it up on my other computer. There, it's caught up with me. Okay. So our aims, what we're trying to do, we've got a strategic plan. We're in the third year of our strategic plan, and that talks about the fact that what we really want to do is deliver justice for people and for public services in Wales with a positive impact. So, if people have suffered an injustice or hardship because something's gone wrong in the delivery of a public service, then we really want to try and put that right as much as we can. Increasing accessibility and inclusion is really important. It's one of our strategic aims. It's something I'm really keen on and was when I came into the role. We know from our own data and where complaints come from, there are certain groups within the community or communities in Wales that are less likely to come to us with complaints. So younger people, for example, people from ethnic minorities and people who are registered disabled. So, those are important groups that we want to hear from. They'll be users, probably quite intense users of public services, and I find it hard to believe that they don't have valid issues that they would need to bring to us from time to time. So we try and focus our work on reaching out to groups and communities to make sure they're aware of what we do and to encourage them to come forward. And with accessibility, trying to make sure that language isn't a barrier, that digital isn't a barrier. If they don't want to do a digital online, they can talk and to one of our staff and do a verbal complaint. There's all sorts of different ways that people can make a complaint. We really want to break down those barriers. We want to increase the impact of our proactive work. So that's the work and our improvement work. So that's about how we try and have a positive impact on improving public services across Wales. Again, Sarah will come back to that later in the presentation to explain a bit more about what that means. And then we have an aim which is about ensuring we're a healthy, efficient and accountable organisation. I think every public body in Wales will probably have a similar aim. If they don't, they should have. We want to make sure we're a great place to work for our staff, for employees. They are absolutely our greatest asset. We've got to make sure we're doing our work efficiently. Our work is funded by Welsh Parliament. We have a budget of just over £6 million a year. So we've got to make sure that we're managing that money well and being as efficient and as effective as we can in how we use it. And we've got to be accountable as well. And as Ombudsman, I'm accountable. I'm independent from government and from Parliament, but I am accountable to the Senedd for the public money that the service is funded through and for the services that we deliver. And every year I get the pleasure. It usually is quite a good session with the committee when we go and they scrutinise our performance and they scrutinise our, they scrutinise how we're managing public money. So that's a really important aim for me as Ombudsman. So talk a bit about when we can deal with a complaint and when we can't, because obviously that there are situations where unfortunately we have to say to people, no, sorry, we can't deal with that complaint. So the first thing the team will ask you if you come to us is, if you want to make a complaint about a housing association or a local authority, have you first complained to that organisation? And, I think that's only right, isn't it? If any of us have got a complaint against a public body, we should go to them first, give them the opportunity to deal with that complaint properly, to answer our questions, apologise and to put things right if something's gone wrong. So we will always ask that first. And if people haven't given the public body a chance to complain, we will ask them to go back and do that. But if they remain dissatisfied after they've had a response, they can still come back to us at a later stage. And we need to make sure everyone's had enough time to respond as well. The other issue is timing. So you'll understand that we get thousands of complaints a year. I'll come on to numbers in a minute. Generally, we will only accept complaints if the issue arose within the last year or if the complainant became aware of it within the last year. I do have discretion to go a bit further and to go beyond the 12 months, and we do on occasions do that. The reason it's here, though, is a good one, which is that if you're trying to investigate an issue, the longer ago it happened, the more difficult it is to investigate it, get proper information and come to a sensible conclusion. So generally, it's complaints that happen within the last 12 months that we would deal with. The other issues I talked about earlier on, our role is to make sure if people have suffered injustice or hardship because of the failure of public service, that we would then look at that complaint and try and assist. So it is important when people bring complaints forward that they can show that there has been injustice or hardship, either for the person complaining or perhaps they might be putting the complaint forward on behalf of someone else. I know this might sound self-evident, but we do get complaints where you look at it and you think, okay, we understand you're not happy with that public body, but actually no one really suffered injustice as a result of that issue. And therefore we have to prioritise those complaints where that can be demonstrated. And then the final point here is quite a tricky one, which is about the legal route. So obviously, if people are dissatisfied with the service they've received, they could go, in some instances, they could go down a legal route to try and resolve that. Many people do, but many people don't want to, and they come to us to try and get it resolved in a different way. The tricky issue here for me in my office is that the legislation that we act under, that give us our powers, says that if a person could reasonably go to the legal system to resolve that issue, that we then shouldn't investigate it. And it's a bit of a tricky issue because it means there's about 250, 300 complaints a year that we probably have to turn away or say no to because of this, we call it a legal bar. it is quite a technical issue, but it's interesting that the Senedd are actually reviewing the Act at the moment, the PSOW Act, and how it's been implemented in Wales. And one of the issues we've raised with them is that we don't feel this legal bar is right, that it shouldn't be there, and that people should have a choice if they've got an issue to come to us or to go through the legal system. Absolutely, we wouldn't support them doing both. But if people say, look, I don't want to go through a legal route, but I want to try and resolve this, they should be able to come to us. So we are making representations to the Welsh Parliament, to the Senedd through that review to try and get this removed. We'll see how that goes. We hope we'll get a report on that later in the summer. So I've hit the button. But this is slow, and I'm trying to remember. I haven't got a paper copy in front of me, so I'm trying to remember what the next slide was.
Michelle, if you're happy, I can click them for you if you'd
Yeah,
like.
go on then, because I think it's just a time delay into West Wales, I should think. There are animations on this one. Yeah, okay, thanks. So what can we do if we receive a complaint? Well, first and foremost, and importantly, we can make recommendations, and we do. We make thousands of recommendations every year from our work. We can make recommendations to that organisation that they put things right. Not just for that individual, as I said earlier, although that's important, but actually saying, if you got it wrong this time, you're probably getting it wrong for lots of other people, and you need to put it right to make sure that doesn't continue happening. And that's part of that improvement agenda. What we most commonly do is we recommend that organisations apologise. That might seem self-evident, but actually, quite often people haven't had an apology when things have gone wrong, and they really value having that sincere apology from an organisation when it's appropriate. It's right that organisation has to respond and explain what happened, because quite often that lack of communication means that hasn't happened. If we make a recommendation, then that body will need to review how it works, whether it's policy, training, practice. And they'll have to evidence to us through our compliance work that they have done that. And possibly we might make a finding of financial redress. Now, what's important here is that if people want compensation, and I suppose this applies particularly in the health area, if people want compensation, then that isn't something that we do. We don't make decisions on compensation. You would have to go through the legal system to achieve that. Financial redress isn't compensation. It's smaller amounts of money, but it is intended to pay people for financial loss if they've had any, and we've done that in housing situations where, people have had I think in one now where people have had high energy bills because a housing body failed to do something that would have repaired that problem at an early stage, or we might issue financial redress just because of the inconvenience or distress that someone may have had in bringing a complaint to us, i.e. if the public body had resolved it in the first place, they never would have had to gone through all of that. So financial redress and compensation are important, and are different, and that's quite an important point. Okay, Olivia. Right, so public service complaints. So going on to the next slide, just what does this look like in a year? So some of the numbers. So last year, we've just closed last financial year at the end of March. We received, as you can see, there over 6,000 inquiries, and that resulted in us handling just over 3,200 complaints. That's an 11% increase on the previous year. I've been Ombudsman just 3 years now, and every single year I've been in post, complaints have gone up. I got another 3 years to go. I think that they'll continue to go up for the next 3 years as well. And, certainly talking to my fellow ombudsmen in Scotland, England and Northern Ireland, they're seeing the same thing as well. Since the pandemic, things have just continued to increase. We've closed just over 3,100 PSC as public service complaints. We've closed that's up by 5% as well last year. So the reason there's a big difference between inquiries and complaints is obviously we get a lot of people who just ring us up asking about something that perhaps we can't deal with. Perhaps it's a premature complaint timing wise. Perhaps they haven't already spoken to the public body concerned. There'd be all sorts of reasons why we might advise them and signpost them somewhere else. But the properly made complaints, if you like, is just over that 3,200 level. You won't be surprised that our largest caseload is for health. 34% of the complaints we deal with are for health, and I think that will continue for the foreseeable future. But that is followed. The next largest category of complaints is housing as well, and that continues to go up year on year. The other big area is complaints handling, and this is really just, and this is where we want to some of our proactive and improvement work that Sarah's leading on is important, because what we want is public bodies to handle complaints properly, because they never should come to us. If they've been handled properly, then they should never end up with us. And so if we see a complaint, we quite often, as we're saying here, 12% uphold complaints because that public body just hasn't followed the policies and procedures and hasn't actually said what it should, hasn't done what it said it would do when it deals with complaints. So that's really important. We have seen that number come down this year to 12% from a higher number that I can't quite remember now, but that's really pleasing because we think that's where some of our complaint standards work might start to show an impact. And at the end of the day, people want the complaints resolved. If it can be done properly by the public body, it's done quicker, it's less hassle and stress for them. It only has to come to us if that's not done properly. And we're just saying here, we've seen more complaints, in that wider increase in public service complaints. We're seeing more complaints year on year about housing associations and also about local councils. Just to say that 20% isn't just housing in local councils, it's all local council complaints. So we deal with complaints, as I said, my powers and that of my office are set out in the PSOW Act Wales, which is relatively new legislation, and the Senedd are doing a review of that at the moment because they're just doing a review as to how that new legislation's been implemented. So that'll be a report that the Senedd will make later in the year. When we receive the complaints, the first stage one, is assessment. So we've got a team that will look at that complaint, gather information from the complainant, but also from the public body, and they'll do an initial investigation as to whether they think it's a very complex complaint that needs to go to a detailed investigation, or whether we can resolve it at that earlier stage. We are trying to do more early resolution at that stage one, because it's better for the complainants and for the public bodies as well. But what we want to do is resolve the issues. We don't necessarily need to do a detailed investigation in all cases. So that's why we're seeing quite a high, that we're dealing with quite a high number of complaints at that first stage. The more complex ones then go on to our investigation team. You'll understand that health complaints in particular can be very complex, particularly where we have to take professional, independent clinical advice. But we are seeing more housing cases going through to investigation as well. And we've taken a slightly different approach this year, in that whereas before we might have closed a housing complaint at stage one because we were able to ER it, do an early resolution, or get the housing provider to comply properly with the complaints handling, for example. If we're seeing a pattern now coming through, rather than allowing all of them to be closed at stage one, we're saying, well, actually, we've seen a pattern of this sort of behaviour from a particular provider. And for that reason, we will agree early resolution because that's better for the tenant, but we'll also move on and do a detailed investigation because it's suggesting to us that there's a systemic issue there because we keep seeing the same complaints coming through. So we've taken a slightly different approach this year, which means more of the complex housing issues are now going through to investigation, and that might result, if it's upheld, that might result in a public report at the end of that investigation. I think I've talked a bit this at the CHC conference earlier in earlier in the year about that. We intervened in 18% of the cases that the complaints that we investigated. And as I said there, we're really trying to do more early resolution stage, and that's increased again this year. So we're really pleased about that. So what we're seeing in terms of housing, complaints against housing associations increased last year. You see the number there increased by 8%, and that's since the pandemic, that's been 142% increase. And complaints about councils has increased by 20% as well. In terms of what the complaints are about, then I think, as I've reported in previous years, it's the majority of complaints we get regarding housing are about repairs and maintenance. Year before last, that was 49%. That's fallen last year to 41%. But as we're getting more complaints coming through about housing, that's still a significant number. For councils, year before last, 10% of the complaints we had were about housing repairs and maintenance. It's 6% last year. So again, that's come down a bit as well. And we do hope that some of our complaints standards work and training that we're doing in public bodies is helping with that, because that's improving complaint handling, and that's resulting in that lower number. Damp and mold is still a big issue. You won't be surprised at that. And 12% of our housing complaints last year related to damp and mold. And what we're saying that then all but one intervention we're at assessment stage, but I know we do have a number of housing complaints currently at investigation stage. So we are seeing more of those coming through just because of their complexity, or because we suspect a systemic issue, because we keep on seeing the same complaints from that provider. So that's the sort of picture that we're seeing specifically for housing.
Sarah, you should have control over the screen now.
Right.
So.
Okay. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, who's going to take the next section.
I don't seem to have the controls, Olivia.
That's okay. I'll click it for you. I think we'll scrap that idea.
Lovely. Thank you, Olivia. And bore da, good morning, everybody. So if we move on now to consider our improvement work, there's several aspects of our work that are aimed at improving public services. And firstly, we have the Complaint Standards Authority, or the CSA. This was introduced in the Act that Michelle's referred to, the 2019 Public Service Ombudsman Wales Act. And the aim of the CSA is to drive improvement in the standards of complaint handling by public bodies in Wales. And we work with the public bodies to introduce a model complaints handling procedure. And that model policy includes a common definition of a complaint. And we also offer free training to help public bodies achieve the standards in complaint handling that we expect. And to date, we have 54 public bodies working under the complaint standards, and that includes all health boards, the Welsh Ambulance Service Trust, Public Health Wales, all 22 local authorities. We have Natural Resources Wales in there, and we also have 21 housing associations working under the standard at the moment. So those bodies represent about 85% of the complaints that we received, that we do receive, and we've targeted those bodies then to adopt the policy first, just to ensure that we provide the most benefits to people using those services. Since September 2020, we've provided more than 550 training sessions on complaint handling. And since the 2020-21 year, we've also regularly published data on complaints handled by local councils. We then introduced publishing data about complaints handled by health boards and trusts. And this autumn, we aim to publish full year data for the housing associations working under the standard as well. So then we can move on, Olivia. Lovely, thank you. So alongside a common definition of a complaint, we've also introduced some minimum standards for complaint handling. And the first of these is that there should be no more than 2 stages in a complaints policy for any public body that works in line with our standards. And the purpose of this is to help streamline the process for complainants, making sure that it's simple. And it avoids overly complicated processes, because we hope that 2 stages allow for an easier process and a process that's easy to understand for people as well. So stage 1 in the process is the informal resolution of complaints. So this is the quick wins, really, while stage 2 is where it moves on to more formal investigation. So an example of a stage 1 complaint might be that an appointment was made for a boiler to be fixed and the tenant complains that nobody turned up for the appointment. So that's something that might be resolved really promptly as a stage 1 complaint. The maximum time frame for a stage 1 complaint is 10 working days, and that's a timescale that can't be extended in line with the policy. And if the public body isn't able to resolve the complaint within those 10 days at stage 1, then it should escalate to stage 2 then. For stage 1 complaints, there's no requirement to formally acknowledge the complaint, and there's no requirement to formally write out at the end of that stage either. But what we do expect is that once the outcome has been delivered, it should be recorded on internal systems with a thorough note of what's been discussed, what's been agreed, and what's been the steps taken to resolve that complaint. So that if a complainant does end up coming to us, then the public body has a record of the steps taken by them at stage 1. So if a complainant remains unhappy after stage 1, then their complaint should be automatically escalated to a stage 2 complaint then. And as we've got on the slide there, the target timeframe for stage 2 is 20 working days. But unlike the timescale in stage 1, the 20 working days can be extended, but the complainant must be kept up to date with the reasons for that extension and an anticipated timescale of when it's expected that the complaint can be resolved. And the reason for this is just to allow time to make sure that the right decision is reached and that the matter is investigated once and that it's investigated well. So we appreciate that some complaints can be more complex and need a little bit more time, and that's where the provision to extend the timescale comes in. Stage 2 does require a formal final response from the public body, and in that response then the public body must explain to the complainant how they can escalate the matter to the relevant body, for example to our office or to the Welsh Language Commissioner, depending on the subject of the complaint really. The complaint standards also places a duty on public services to use the complaint information that they gather. So there's a requirement to use the information and the data collected from complaints handling to improve services. So it's expected that at least twice a year, a report must be sent to the appropriate person in the organisation on performance to help drive service improvement and service delivery. So really taking note of the numbers of complaints, the types of complaints, or the areas that complaints are coming in from, to see if there's anything that can be done proactively to improve those service provisions. Lovely. So we'll move on now to the principles of good complaint handling. The guidance provided by the Complaint Standards Authority describes 6 principles of good complaint handling, and they're all outlined there on the slide. So the first one is complainant focused. So the complainant should always be at the centre of the complaints process, and public bodies must show that they can respond and adjust to the differing needs of complainants. So what I mean here is that it's always important to think about what method of communication does the complainant want to use. Do they need to be advised about advocacy services or signposted to citizens' advice, for example? Are there any language barriers? Do they need translation services to enable them to make their complaint well? Another to be mindful of is, are there any literacy needs in terms of dealing with somebody's complaint? Would someone be able to understand better if they're informed of the outcome of their complaint on the phone rather than receiving a letter that might be a little bit complicated or they might not be able to read? So complainants should be included in the investigation, and there should be no assumptions about what they want or what they mean. And we encourage people who are dealing with complaints to pick up the phone and understand, discuss with them and make sure they properly understand what someone's complaining about, really. Then the second one is that it should be a simple process, really. So it needs to be well publicised and have easy to follow instructions. And as I've already mentioned, having no more than 2 stages means that it is hopefully a simple process to follow. And then under the common definition of a complaint, people can use any communication methods to convey their complaint that they want to. So we're not limiting people to have to make their complaints in writing. It can be a spoken, written, and in the days of social media, they may sometimes make their complaints on social media and they can be picked up on there, really. And complaint responses should set out clearly the next stages, and then at the final response, their right to approach the Ombudsman's office then if they remain dissatisfied. We then have fair and objective. So complainants and the staff complained about should be treated equally and with dignity when a complaint is made. So colleagues who have been complained about should understand that should make sure that they understand the complaints process and also what will happen as the complaint is handled. If they need to be interviewed, they should be offered support and asked if they want a representative to be present. And then complainants should also receive a complete and appropriate response to their concerns. And number 4 then, timely and effective. So again, picking up the investigate once and investigate it well. Investigations should be thorough, but also prompt. And as I've mentioned already, keeping the complainant updated throughout, especially if there's a lengthy investigation as a result of a complaint. And then number 5, complainants should receive an honest and clear explanation of the findings of an investigation, making sure that the public bodies are accountable for the findings there. And service providers should explain to complainants what changes will be made if their complaint is upheld wherever possible. So that might be changes to policy, changes it could be anything, but keeping the complainant involved there on what action will be taken is recommended as well. And then the last one there then is a commitment to continuous improvement. So as I've already mentioned, really, information from complaints should be collated and analysed, and that data should be shared with the organisation's senior leaders and with the Ombudsman. And the reason for doing this is to support improvement in complaint handling and service delivery. In addition to this, then, decision makers should regularly review the information gathered from complaints when they're reviewing service delivery provision, because there is almost always likely to be some kind of service improvement that can fall out of complaints that an organisation has received. And then if we move on. Lovely, thank you. So next, we have the power to conduct own initiative investigations to improve public services. The 2019 Act gave the Ombudsman the power to start an investigation where evidence suggests that there might be systemic service failure or maladministration. And there's two types of own initiative investigations that Michelle can start. There's extended and wider investigations. So an extended investigation is the extension of a matter that's already under investigation. So we will have received a complaint and something else comes up during the course of an investigation that indicates that there might be maladministration or service failure, leading us to want to extend that investigation. And then the second then is a wider own initiative investigation. This is a standalone investigation and it doesn't have to relate to a complaint that we've received from an individual. When we decide on the focus for a wider own initiative investigation, we think about whether, or the considerations we take is whether there's evidence to suggest that there's systemic maladministration or service failure. But we also take into consideration whether the matter could impact a wide group of individuals. And it's particularly relevant where that group of individuals might be particularly vulnerable, or it might represent a disadvantaged group. For example, if there's a group of people who might find it difficult to bring their complaint to the Ombudsman's office, then that might indicate that there's a need to start a wider own initiative investigation. To date, we've concluded two wider own initiative investigations, and both of these focused on services for highly vulnerable groups of individuals. The first one related to homelessness, and the second was in relation to unpaid carers, both groups of individuals that would find it difficult for different reasons to be able to bring a complaint to our office. And then the next slide. Thank you, Olivia. And then Michelle's already touched upon this. The next thing that we do to help improve public service is our compliance work. As Michelle mentioned earlier, if we receive a complaint and we see that the complainant has suffered an injustice as a result of a public body getting something wrong, then we can make recommendations aimed at putting matters right. There's two types of recommendations that we can make, with the first being aimed at addressing the injustice, and that might involve things like Michelle's mentioned, an apology, providing a service that the complainant is entitled to, fixing something, or the financial redress. And then the second type is aimed at improving the public body's processes, so that the problem doesn't happen again, and almost to stop that happening to other individuals. And these types of recommendations might involve actions such as introducing or updating the policy that in place. It might be staff training, undertaking audits. There's lots of things that can be done to recommend service improvements. And as the slide explains there, last year we made 1,472 recommendations, and about 14% of these were to improve public services. And if we look specifically at complaints relating to housing, we made 248 recommendations in complaints where housing was the main subject of the complaint, and 6.5% of these were to improve public services. We then monitor compliance with the recommendations made to ensure that they are delivered and that public services are improved. And this is something that we report on in our annual report as well. And I think that's it for me before I hand back to Michelle.
Thanks, Sarah. Just wanted to talk for a couple of slides about our thematic report that we did last year. So one of the things I can do as Ombudsman, as Sarah's talked about a lot of our improvement work and our specific powers, such as OI, own initiative, which is quite unique. It's only ourselves in Northern Ireland have this power in the UK, which you know we feel is a really positive thing. But what I can also do and do from time to time is do thematic reports. So this is really where we're seeing trends in our complaint data, where we think there's a lot of complaints which it would be good to share more widely what the complaints are, what the outcome was, and what the learning is from it. You know, that within a sector, it would be worth doing that in order to share that learning and good practice across, and indeed pitfalls across that sector. So last November, I did published a report called Living in Disrepair, which was a thematic report about disrepair, damp and mold that complainants were bringing issues to us about. I've already talked about the increase in complaints that we're seeing relating to housing, disrepair and repair maintenance is a big part of that. But within that, damp and mold, and you know, we know there's been a big focus of attention on this within England. I wanted to see what was happening here in Wales and get into that a bit more. So I produced that report last autumn, and the purpose of it is to be helpful, hopefully, in reminding landlords of their responsibilities, of sort of showing where things have gone wrong, and also, you know, identifying from those the good practice and learning that those organisations had as a result. What we're trying to do here is just raise that issue and conversation with policymakers and those in influence and power across Wales to say, look, these things have a real impact on people's day-to-day lives. You know, you will know that. But also, I wanted to make the link here with the impact housing has on the outcomes of people's lives, on them achieving the potential they want, on their ability to be able to go out to work, to be healthy, and to have a good quality of life. And it's a basic thing that we should all have here in Wales. So I made that link, and obviously if you're living in a property that's in disrepair, if you're suffering from damp and mold, those are really going to be limiting your abilities to get on with your life and have a quality of life. So we took a number of examples from across housing in both councils and housing associations. There were some really bad examples there, I thought, of you know, how people had suffered injustice because housing providers had just not acted when they should have. They hadn't listened to complaints properly, and they hadn't got in and just sorted the issue out. And only when and this frustrates me, not only in housing, in other sectors, only when the Ombudsman gets involved do they go, oh yeah, right, yeah, now we'll sort this. It shouldn't be necessary, shouldn't have to wait for us to get involved. They should just do it. So, you know, this thematic report was really about calling some of that out, I suppose. And I made a number of so the case studies are there, but I made a number of recommendations in there, which I'm sure all of you will go, well, that's, you know, of course you should do those things, but I think they needed to be said again. The stock survey, I think, was important, and those of you who work for housing providers will appreciate the importance of that. If you don't know the condition of your stock and what you're putting people into, then you can't manage it well. we see a number of complaints coming through about people being put into properties. We're still seeing them put into properties that they shouldn't have been put into. Tenants left previously saying there was issues, damp mold or other issues. And instead of taking the opportunity while those properties are void to fix it, they're putting other people in and then other problems created. So, full and proper pre-letting inspections, we feel we're asking housing providers to relook at that again and make sure, absolutely sure, that they weren't taking that opportunity when properties were void. The issue of, we again see a lot of complaints coming through. People are saying, well, I've rung the office, I've logged this, I've said it needs repair, I've rung again, I'm not being listened to. I see someone's put something in the chat here about verbal complaints. I'm not being listened to in time. If housing providers can have a mechanism for going back and checking in their systems, what are the frequent things that keep coming up? Why is there 10 complaints from one property? Has it been sorted? Because once you get to that stage, it's a complaint, and this false sort of dialogue we get into about, oh, it's a service request, it's not a complaint. Well, I'm sorry, if it's been made 10 or, if it's been made several times and not been adhered to and not been actioned, then it's a complaint. And we're saying housing providers need to be more proactive about that. Prioritization. We saw a number of examples where people had policies in place for things like vulnerable tenants or those living in vulnerable situations, but they didn't seem to be using them. The gentleman who needed a new front door, he was clearly someone who was in a vulnerable position, but he was ignored by his housing provider until we got involved. We recognise there can be some complex issues sometimes with the state of properties, and we were recommending. We've seen some good practice on this, and I think we identified the good practice in the thematic report where independent advice had been secured. So there was an independent view taken about the state of that property. Was there a damp mold issue? Was there a particular issue? And that independence is helpful sometimes to broker that way forward between a tenant and a landlord who are obviously got different views on the situation. And we took the opportunity, the final recommendation, to promote what we're doing around complaint standards. Sarah's explained we're about halfway through getting all housing associations on board. We hope to do that by the end of the financial year. All councils already are on board. So, I think that's important because we generally want to work in collaboration with housing associations and councils to improve complaint handling and the experience that tenants have. So we made a number of recommendations in that thematic report, and I think there was some really powerful case studies in there as well. And if you've not had the chance to look at it, you might want to take a look, and I'm sure we'll do more and keep an eye on that and do more on housing in the future. So I think I'm going to hand back to Sarah now, who's got a couple of recent case studies for you, which I'm sure will be of interest. Sarah.
Lovely, thank you, Michelle. So the first example I have for you is a complaint that we investigated about Cardiff Council. So in October 2023, the complainant complained that the council had delayed in responding to her reports concerning mould and repairs to a rear wall at her property. She brought a complaint to the Ombudsman's office in January 2024, explaining that her husband had a number of health issues and they also had a child living at the property. So this is one complaint that the Ombudsman investigated rather than resolved as an early resolution. And the Ombudsman's investigation considered whether the council had responded to the complainant's report of mould and the associated repair work, and whether it had addressed the underlying causes of it appropriately and in a timely manner. So the Ombudsman upheld this complaint and she found that the council had not complied with its own timescales for completing the inspection or the identified routine repairs. It took too long to rectify the issues, which caused detriment to the complainant and an inconvenience to her. So the investigation also found that the council's communication with the complainant was substandard. She was having to chase up for updates on the repairs that had been agreed. The complainant had to seek intervention from the Ombudsman's office twice in order for a response and for the repairs to be progressed then. So the council accepted that it had a backlog of repair work, which it was addressing, and it also accepted that its internal processes and communication with tenants needed improvement. It was also reviewing its repair processes as well. So what did we recommend as a result of upholding that complaint then? So we recommended that the council should provide a written apology to the complainant, something that we often see in complaints that we resolve through early resolution and investigation. And they were also recommended to make a redress payment of £300 on this occasion. And this was to cover the time and trouble of having to pursue her complaint to our office, not just once, but twice, in order to get things moving with the repairs required to her property. The council also agreed to complete a review of its internal repair processes and to ensure that its systems were fit for purpose and provide a copy of it to the complainant, to us, I mean, and any action plan falling out of that. So this brings us back really to the 6 principles of good complaint handling. It highlights the importance of resolving complaints in a timely and effective manner, also highlighting the need to be complainant focused to ensure that they know that the actions will be taken, that they're kept up to date with progress, or if there's any delays encountered, because this demonstrates that a lack of contact can lead to frustrations on behalf of the complainant, because tenants can feel like they're being ignored if they're not being proactively kept updated and they're having to contact and they're seeing nothing done as a result. Then it just leads to that feeling of being ignored and the frustration there. So that's our first example of an investigation completed by the Ombudsman. And then the second example I have is a complaint we received about Newport City Homes. So in January of this year then, the complainant complained to Newport City Homes that it had failed to address issues, the complainant complained that Newport City Homes had failed to address issues with vermin, damp and heating at her home. And these had been going on since September 2023, so over a year that she'd been having these issues. There was issues with her windows not locking, repairs needed, some pipework at the property after some flooding repairs had been completed. And she was also given some conflicting information about responsibility for pest control at the property. So the Ombudsman found that although the Housing Association had responded to the complaints, it hadn't investigated or addressed all of the concerns raised by the tenant. So where the Housing Association had identified shortcomings, they hadn't provided an apology, and the actions that they'd identified in their complaint investigation hadn't been carried out. So all of this caused unnecessary delays to resolving the complainant's concerns, caused her frustration as well. But on top of this, it affected her health as well. So on this occasion, it was decided to settle the complaint without an investigation through an early resolution that we've already explained. So as part of that early resolution, we sought and gained the Housing Association's agreement to provide, firstly, the apology for the shortcomings that they'd already identified but not apologised for failing to adequately investigate and respond to all her concerns, and for the delays in carrying out the actions identified as well. On top of that, the Housing Association did agree to provide the complainant with a further complaint response to make sure that all the matters that she'd raised in her complaint were addressed, and for that response to include a schedule of outstanding investigations and works that needed to be undertaken, so that it was clear to her then what was going to be taken and the timescales for completing that work. So what's interesting here, and links back to the thematic report really, is that the complainant identified the damp in her property shortly after moving into the property. So it again highlights the importance of undertaking the stock surveys, the pre-let inspections, and taking advantage when there is a void at a property to make sure that the condition of that property is up to the right standard. Yes, as I said, highlighted in the thematic report there as well. In this complaint, linking back to the principles of good complaint handling as well, is that the matter had been investigated, but not all concerns had been picked up and addressed. And so that again highlights the need to properly understand a complaint, to know exactly what the complainant is complaining about and what they might be expecting a response to, really. So it's just keeping the complainant at the heart of that complaint investigation. It also demonstrates the importance of that apology, really. The Housing Association had identified the shortcomings, but hadn't apologised for them in the response provided to her. And again, the actions identified not being completed, the organisation not being accountable and following through on what it had agreed to do. So I hope that those two examples just demonstrate to you the types of housing complaints that we receive at our office, and the issues that we're identifying and continue to identify really in casework, as we identified in the thematic. Lovely. I'll hand back to Michelle.
Right. So you'll be pleased to know this is the final slide, because I know we've been talking for a while and you've got lots of good questions and comments in the chat that we'd like to get to. So just the final slide, I think is the next one on, Olivia. There we are. So just to say, what are we going to be up to over the next year? So we've already talked about getting all housing associations under complaint standards, and we will continue to do that. We've had great cooperation and collaboration from the sector, I have to say that, but we want to make sure all housing associations are under it by the end of the year, because that gives that reassurance, hopefully, to all tenants. We're working hard on using data better as an organisation for all our work, really, but own initiative as well, because I'm now looking at what would be our next own initiative, wider own initiative work. I am minded to look to go into the housing sector with my next own initiative, but we're looking at the data on that at the moment, and where we might focus that investigation. We'll continue to work on improving accessibility. I'm sure we will continue to work. I'll continue to work on this until I leave the role. You know, it's always a challenging thing for public sector bodies to do, but we're committed to continue to work, particularly with those groups, to make sure everyone who wants to and needs to can access our services. And we'll continue to focus on our compliance and impact on public services, and hopefully the presentation today has given you a bit of an insight into that work, which perhaps isn't always visible to people, but you know is really, really important. So I'd like to thank you all for listening very patiently. It's been quite a long time. It's quite a detailed presentation. Hopefully it's fulfilled the brief and the things you wanted to hear about, but very happy to hear your comments and thoughts and any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Sarah. I think a lot of things covered there, and it's been really, really useful. I can always judge by the comments that it's triggering questions and comments. I'm going to try and cover some of them. I'm not going to do them necessarily in order. I'm going to cover some of the quick ones off, if that's okay. So just quick ones about the process. Richard Martin talked about financial redress recommendations. Are they binding? Do they have to abide by it? Do you ever have anyone who says, no, we're not going to pay that? Or do most housing associations or landlords accept that? Yeah.
So that's a very good question. In terms of our recommendations, including on financial redress, none of them are binding. So, we are, and that's the same for all ombudsmen. We are seeking to work with public bodies to achieve the recommendations and outcomes. And generally, as I said, that works well and we have good compliance. On financial redress, yes, it's the same as all other recommendations. So if we make a finding of a financial redress, it's not huge sums of money we're talking about, then we do expect that they would be undertaken and delivered. No, any complaint that we're making a recommendation on, whether we're doing it in, as an early resolution or as a formal investigation, the public body will always see that draft outcome and recommendations before we finalize it. So there is that opportunity for a discussion. And we do have discussions at times if public bodies feel that's not appropriate. But generally, we get good compliance. So the answer is it's not binding, but we do expect them to be
You don't get
delivered.
many who say no then, do you? No.
No, we don't want a public falling out with people. We just want to try and get on and deliver, which is what we're all about.
And Amanda had asked whether those redress payments would affect tenant benefits. Don't know if you know the answer to that.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if Sarah's got an insight into that, but I don't know. But I guess, I suppose there could be an issue there, but I don't know, to be honest.
I'm not sure either, Michelle. I'm sorry.
Amanda, I don't know how, but we're going to try and find that out. I would imagine it's very different to be in that legal when you go to court and you're awarded £30,000 or £100,000. I think it's a very different scale. So, but I don't know how, but as always, Amanda, thanks. And you just give me another headache to try and find out. So thank you. Right, so maybe I'll start this. The other thing Amanda has asked as well is, and this comes up a few times, is that increase in complaints? I think housing had gone up slightly. Is that because more people are informed now? Does that the complaint standards have things in there, Sarah, about informing people of their rights to complain to the Ombudsman, or is it just complaints are going up? I know, Michelle, you touched on it's happening in Scotland and Northern Ireland as well.
I think there's a few things at play, isn't there? I think there is just a general trend. Public services are under pressure. We know that right across the UK, and I think that's why myself and all my colleagues in other devolved nations are seeing similar issues. But probably, people are more aware of. I get a sense that since the pandemic, people are more aware of their rights and more prepared to come forward and say, actually, no, that's not right. It should be better. So, but there is an element, you're right, in the complaint standards work. When someone gets to stage 2, if they're not happy with the outcome they've had, that public body is then duty bound under the complaint standards to inform them that they can go to the Ombudsman if they remain dissatisfied. And I think, that probably that referral was probably patchy beforehand. So that probably means more people coming through to us. So it's probably a combination.
I agree with you on that. Yeah. It was patchy is probably the right word for it. And now it's a bit clearer. I think the other thing also, damp and mold. I think the great work that ITN did and stuff showed that people shouldn't have to put up with this or shouldn't suffer in silence. And landlords themselves have gone out a bit more and said, talk to us. And I hope that's addressed that. I'm just going from the top here. Could you ask one of my own, which was about that legal bar? I was quite fascinated by what you said about reform there. What type of issues would it help? I don't know if you could give me 1 or 2 examples of, or do you see it being ever used to housing maybe, or is it a different kind?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's of use right across the public sector, to be honest. The point is that if just because someone could take legal action through the courts doesn't mean to say they want to or have the means to. And as we know, there's a lot of backlogs there as well. So that could be very time consuming as well. So if all they're looking for is to get answers to get something put right, to get an apology, then actually that's probably a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut to go through the legal system. But the trouble is, at the moment, my legislation says if people can, then we should step back and allow them to do that. Our argument is people should have the choice.
Mm.
And so I think removing that bar will give people more choice and enable us to get involved in cases which, we might have to turn away because of the legal bar provision, but people might go, well, I'm not going to the courts. And so they don't get any redress. So for that reason, we really do think it should be removed. And I don't know, but I think that hopefully there will be some sympathy with Senedd members about that, and we might get some movement on it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I say it's not for everyone. It doesn't take away your legal rights, but there are some shady claim companies out there as well, and that concerns me. I see some terrible cases of that where actually they just want it fixed, and that's all they're looking for, isn't it? So thank you for that. Let's go down. We'll leave the case book. I'll come back to that later because I answered my own question by looking it up. I think Martin had fed back that when he'd used the online, that some of the attachments didn't attach themselves. So maybe that's something for you to have a look at, or to maybe ask somebody in the IT to test again. Yeah.
No, I think we'll take that one away and have a look at it. Shouldn't be the case, but that's helpful feedback.
There's people here who would happily test something for you. I'm not speaking for everybody here, but there will be some people, if you want to run some tests or something with different devices and stuff, we can arrange that.
Okay.
Right. Talked about that, Amanda, about the redress. Martin, that same thing about making recommendations versus orders. I think you've covered some of that already, haven't you? It is a recommendation.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
It goes back to, does the conversation, or does anybody go, nope, I'm not doing that? And what happens then?
We have some interesting conversations, sometimes. And what we say to public bodies, look, if you've got a real problem with the recommendations, they will know their business better than we do. So, they might say, look, doing that's not going to be reasonable, but actually we could do this, but the point is having that conversation about the best way to resolve an issue before it's published. What I don't want, and we do get there sometimes, but not often, is you get to the position where the public body goes, yeah, we'll do that. And then when you actually go back and say, well, have you done it? They go, no, we're not going to do it. We go, hang on, you agreed to do that. You had every opportunity, you need to do it. And let's try and resolve this. And generally we do. So, but yes, a few interesting conversations sometimes in the background to get to where we need to be.
Yeah. The complaint standards, I think so. It was, is there a target? You said about 12 months or so to try and get all housing associations on there. If you're somebody here and you weren't sure if your landlord was under it, is there a list or a migration path, or just ask?
I'm not sure if we have a list actually, and that's a really good idea for us to have, really, because it's easy to say all health boards and all local authorities, but while we're working through housing associations, it would probably be helpful to have a list there.
It may not have to be published. If anyone wants to come via TPAS, we'll ask, or we can have a chat to you or something and just say, anybody,
absolutely.
Richard, Martin, anyone wasn't aware, no problem.
Yeah, definitely. Our contact details are at, or my contact email is at the end of the presentation. So if anybody has any questions about whether a housing association is working under the standard, then feel free to drop me an email and I can clarify on that. We are working to bring more under, so I'm hoping over this coming year now that the number of housing associations working under the standard will increase, and our training officer will be delivering training to those and bringing them up to speed and up to the standard that we expect of them then as well.
That's good. Maybe we generally tend to do this once a year about this month, so maybe next year we'll have 100%. Yeah, let's see how we get.
Same for it.
Yeah. I think, Martin, you've raised, it's not necessarily to the Ombudsman, but I think it's an interesting point because it's not the first time we've heard this, which is verbal complaints not getting actioned or ignored. I think Amanda has made that point as well. Experienced tenants always use email and things like that. I think that's not the first time I've heard this, and it's something as a sector. I say Michelle and myself were at recently a governance conference with housing associations, and I think I need to raise that with them. There's that feeling that verbals aren't hitting the mark or getting the action they want to see. I don't know if you've got any comment on that, Michelle, and whether you've seen any of that before.
Yeah, and I think we can take verbal complaints, but we don't just take verbal. Obviously, if someone rings and says, I'm not going to do it online, I'm not going to write to you, but I want to make a complaint, the team will book an appointment and they'll fill in the complaint form for them, and that will be sent back to that individual. So they've got a record. So that's the other thing that, I think we would want to encourage housing association, all public bodies to do. If you take a verbal complaint, and that might be important to be more accessible to that individual, then actually there should be a record, and that record should be shared with them afterwards, whatever their preferred way of communication is, because then they've got that record, but they're still able to make a verbal complaint. Because I guess there are a lot of people out there across Wales who just wouldn't be able to cope with the form or writing it down, but want to make a verbal complaint, and they shouldn't be a barrier to them doing that with whatever public body they want to. Is that covered in the complaint standards training, Sarah?
Yeah, I was going to jump in really. One of the focus, or part of the focus of the complaint standards training is having that definition of what a complaint is, and making sure that frontline staff are aware of that decision, definition, and that they can recognise complaints, even if a tenant isn't saying, I want to complain about this. Listening to them and listening to them well should enable them to recognise this meets every point of the definition of a complaint. And then, ask that tenant then, this meets our definition of a complaint. How do you want me to progress this now? So that's raising awareness at the front line. And I think that should enable people to make their complaints then and take it forward from that point.
Good. I'm going to pick up Lynn's comments at the bottom, which is about recommendations and published on your website, because this is a resource I think isn't well enough known. I love it. And when I was meeting with the chief exec recently, I filtered on that landlord, looked at all the complaints and what had been logged with the Ombudsman, just to get a feel so that I could bring that up in conversation to say, you've had these issues, what are you learning from it? How are you moving forward? Does somebody want to?
Yeah.
Michelle, you want to comment on effectively the database and how powerful it is?
Yeah. We've good to hear you find it useful, because we upgraded it last year with our website, and so it's good to see it's being used. So there's a lot of data there. We publish all our decisions. That's the bottom line. So two things we do: if we investigate something or do an assessment at stage 1 and do an early res, then we will publish a decision notice. And that will explain, but that will include what our recommendations were, if any were made. So that would be on the website for that relevant body. If it's a really serious issue, and we do a few of these, as you can imagine, around health, if it's a really serious issue and there are systemic issues that we feel are relevant to the whole sector, then I will publish a public interest report, and that full report would be published, and those are also on our website. So yeah, absolutely. What you can do, you can go in there, you can filter based on the public body or the issue or within a time frame, and that will tell you what decisions have been made and recommendations have been made relating to that public body. So there is a lot of information there.
It goes back a number of years, doesn't it? And
yeah.
I find it really useful. Lynn, I know you wanted to filter on ADRA, or you can. And also, I was pleased I just checked during the session, local authorities, you can now filter on housing as well, whereas before you could only see all local authority. And
yes.
You had to sit through to find the housing ones if you're a housing person like me.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can just filter. Carmarthen Council, I just tried it, gave me all the housing ones going back a number of years. So I think it's really useful for scrutiny for tenant groups here to look at what's in your area versus compared to another housing association or another local authority that's near you. So I'd really recommend it on their website. Thanks. Olivia, sorry, I've been doing some talking. Richard Martin has raised the issue the English Ombudsman can make orders. So we go back to detail again versus recommendations.
Yeah. Is this the housing ombudsman that you're
Yes,
thinking
yeah,
of?
yeah.
Yeah. I think they may be able to, yeah. But we can't. We can only make recommendations.
Right. But as I think you said already, the recommendations are usually taken forward, aren't they? They're not.
Yeah. It's usually we usually get results. Yeah, thanks. Sarah's just put the link there for our findings on our website, so people can go and have a play with that.
Yeah. And you said look at it. I think it's really important when I read, as I say, I use that database quite a lot to look at
Good.
landlords before meetings, before someone's going to a tenant group. I might bring examples and go, did you know these were actually recent cases? Maybe it's worth looking at for a scrutiny subject or a subject for the tenant group to look at to work with the landlord to improve. You know, why are you seeing recommendation after recommendation on damp and mold or something? So it's good. It's good.
Yeah, I just wanted to butt in there, sorry, and say to everyone, because I know Michelle Morris, you mentioned advocacy services and things before. I just wanted to reassure people that if you did have, because I come from a sort of advocacy background myself, if you did have a sort of complaint that you were really struggling with, there are lots of different services in Wales which do offer sort of advocacy. And it sounds like a bit of a weird word, but it is literally, if you don't know what it is, it's just basically having your voice heard, helping you navigate your issue. So before it perhaps gets to that serious level of going to the Ombudsman, there are lots of different services in Wales that offer different bits of sort of support and things for people too when they are out there. And even just having those involved sometimes can escalate complaints as well.
And Sarah's just put the link again. There's a new data. We've updated the database on our website because quite often, you're right, Olivia. What we'll do, people will come to our team and say, "Oh, I need help with this or whatever." They might not be at the stage where they actually need to make a complaint to us, but they need someone to sit down and help them with that, and we will signpost them to appropriate bodies if we can.
Yeah, and I think that's this morning on our Facebook. Somebody had a challenge with a local authority. I spoke to that before the session, the local authority, and they've got, we may have made a mistake, and now they're in touch with that tenant to pick that subject up. So please do use, as I say, the advocates that are there if that's something you would need help with. It's good. I think I've covered it. Have I covered anything that anybody? I'm just trying to scan through now. Anybody out there? It feels like we're coming towards the end, but anyone got any more questions want to ask? Sorry, what's that?
Message out.
Was that fine? Yeah. Anybody? You can put your hand up at this stage if you want. Or no, there's a few people I'm conscious it's 12 o'clock now, so they might need to go. Ombudsman needs more teeth, but I think that's something Michelle is looking to constant reform. I know, having followed the Ombudsman in my 9 years, I think I've been in the sector, I've seen that power grow over and build. It does take a little bit of time with the Senedd who have to give you those powers, but I've certainly seen that steady progress over the years. So thank you. Can I say thank you, Sarah? Thank you, Michelle. Really honest session. Really enjoyed it. It's been really useful. I will say thank you to Olivia, who's only on week 4, so a day into week 4. So thank you for making this session happen and her prep and everything for this. Things like this don't happen without people behind the scenes. So thank you to her as well. I hope you've enjoyed the session. It'll be recorded if you want to. We often see more views afterwards on the recorded session. Tenant groups play it in their sessions, things like that. So please, thank you. And fill in the form. I don't know where it is. No one ever. I've got the worst stats in GPAS for people filling in the forms. I get shamed regularly at meetings for this. So please do it for Olivia if you won't do it for me. Fill in the feedback form.
If Sarah and Michelle, if you're happy for me to distribute the slides to the delegates, I'll do that by the end of the week if you're okay with that, for me to share them. Yeah, so
absolutely.
you can all have copies of the slides as well. And thank you so much for coming. Yeah, it was really excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And thanks for positive comments. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.
Thank you for this, Michelle. I'm just closing up the attendees.